Ohio State, Georgia lining up for the national semifinal in Atlanta. We got Pat Murphy on the line from Bucknuts 247 Sports to help us break it down, as we will a number of times and already have. Please join Pat on 247 Sports Bucknuts. Pat, how you doing today?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I am doing just fine. There's really no shortage of angles to this, whether you go nuts and bolts football on the field, matchups, maybe the two most talented rosters in the country, and then go beyond that to the intangibles and the questions about Ohio State's focus, emotions, and everything else. But kind of getting back to another tangible to start us out, because you interviewed a number of players this week, would be injuries. So we know Travion Henderson is out. Take us through what we know and what we're conjecturing about. And of course, the running back room is a huge issue.
Certainly. I mean, that was a big problem throughout the season for Ohio State. If you go back to the beginning of the year, that Notre Dame game and some of the games that followed shortly thereafter, Ohio State was running the ball really well, using Travion Henderson, using Mayan Williams. Both guys kind of cycled in and played well when they were both on the field. So it seemed to be going well, and then injuries started to take place. Travion Henderson has subsequently been known that he was dealing with, broken bones and torn ligament in his foot. He then announced this past week that he would have surgery and miss the playoff. He obviously didn't play towards the end of the season. So, look, I was hopeful. I think a lot of Buckeye fans were hopeful that you could get Travion Henderson back for this game, given you have a month, roughly a little bit more, I guess, than since the last time the Buckeyes took the field. But something like that, was always going to be a long shot to get him back out there. The good news is that Mayan Williams, talking to him this week, said he's going to be 100% ready to go for that game. Mayan Williams did play against Michigan, didn't play the week prior against Maryland, was not effective or not as effective against Michigan as he has been in the past. So I think it'll be huge for him. He's been dealing with that wrist that he hurt in the Penn State game, also some knee issues, it seems like. So nothing nearly as serious as what Travion was going through, but still this time to, obviously he's still pressing and whatnot, but to get healthy is going to be big for him, really for all of his teammates. I mean, even the guys that may not have clearly been dealing with injuries, are still banged up going through the course of a football season. You got Matthew Jones, the left guard, who play against Michigan. They're hopeful that he will be back and ready to go for the game against Georgia. Then on the defensive side of the ball, defensive tackle Hall, a guy who has shown a lot of good stuff, but has really been limited this year with injuries. I mean, if you look at his snap counts, it's insanely low, especially given the production. And they've just essentially had him on a snap count for much of the season. He said he's going to be as well. Cornerback Cameron Brown started against Michigan. Obviously, he missed the tackle that led to the first big touchdown for the Wolverines. But he said he is back to being 100% after leaving that game, said it was more of just a stinger. He really wanted to get back out there and kind of make up for the mistake he made in that game, but wasn't able to. So, look, other than Travion Henderson and obviously Jackson Smith-Njigba, who this hamstring injury has forced him to essentially end his Ohio State career and prepare for the NFL draft because he was not going to be ready in time for the playoff as hoped. Other than those two, though, should be about as healthy of a Buckeye team as we've seen since maybe that Notre Dame game, definitely early in the season. And obviously when you're playing the number one team in the country, essentially in their backyard, an hour or so away from Athens and Atlanta, you're going to need to be as full go as you possibly can. And you'd love to have Jackson Smith-Njigba added back in as a weapon and Travion Henderson looking like the Travion Henderson we saw early in the year and obviously last season. But you need to be as healthy as possible. And it sounds like other than those two guys, the Buckeyes will be.
The health of Mayan Williams would answer much of these questions going forward for the two games that could potentially be played. But has Ryan Day ever brought to light the strategy in using Chip Tranum and sitting Dallin Hayden versus Michigan, other than we put the players out there that give us the best chance of winning?
Yeah, he was asked about that this week as well when we spoke to him and gave what I think is somewhat of a coach speak answer, but also gives some light to the thinking there. He said basically the flow of the game never really went into Dallin's favor. And Tony Alford, the running backs coach, went with Trip Bainham. I think what I, kind of reading between the lines of everything he said about that was they probably would have used Dallin more had they not gotten down in the second half and needed a running back out there that they can trust in pass protection. Let's remember, Dallin Hayden's a freshman, and not everything a running back has to do is, carrying the ball. Days mentioned a lot this year ball security when talking about Dallin Hayden. He was asked actually this week, is that because he's fumbling in practice? Because Dallin Hayden, no running back on Ohio State, knock on wood, has fumbled yet this year. Ball security isn't an issue for anyone, but specifically Dallin Hayden. And Ryan Day said, no, that's just something we emphasize with all the running backs. So it sounds like, look, they used train him. Obviously, he was a guy who'd moved back to running back from linebacker earlier this year to help with depth. And look, he was effective, right? But I do think it was weird that Dallin Hayden didn't get in. I do understand those pass protection concepts that he has to continue to develop as a freshman. I have to imagine that he plays a role against Georgia. He's just too good. And I said this before Michigan, so maybe I'll eat my words again. But if Ohio State wants to win this game, unless Mayan Williams just goes out and everything is clicking, I think you're going to need Dallin Hayden in there. You just give him something different. He had back-to-back 100-yard rushing games prior to the Michigan game, and neither of those, he started the game. He had to come in off the bench. So I understand he's a freshman. I understand maybe not everything has clicked into place for him, but I think he's proven he's talented enough to give you something different than what you're going to get from Chip Trayanum, different than what you're going to get from Mayan Williams. And that's a weapon you're going to need against this really talented Bulldogs defense. So the more things you can throw at the Bulldogs, the better. And I think Dallin Hayden's got to be one of them.
Tried to explain to a few people outside of the Ohio State fan base this week, because they were very level-headed college football fans that were wondering why there was so much negative thought and opinion about this team by its own fan base, considering they're 11-1. And we're talking about fans of other elite teams. I'm not talking about Kansas fans. And I tried to explain the amount of pressure placed on these players to win every game. That basically winning every week, even against the good opponents, just check, check, check. Can't really celebrate. I hope that they do. I know that they do to a certain extent, but it's off to the next game. And then if Michigan is not successful, then that ruins everything. Now they've got a second life. And, the emotional roller coaster that you called it before we started to record has to be something to be considered. We can go through the matchups and the X's and O's, and hopefully we'll have you on again before we get to the game. But just trying to consider the fragility possibly of the psyche of this team and the confidence, and whether they consider this new life and a breath of fresh air, and hey, we get to make up for all of that we blew in the Michigan game, or maybe their confidence took a hit and they're going to carry this into this game.
I think it's what you said initially about the fan base. I've talked to friends of mine and other people, and it blows my mind that you're 11-1, you're in the playoff. Yeah, I understand you lost to Michigan. Yeah, I understand you didn't get to play in the Big Ten championship game if you're Ohio State, but the standards at Ohio State are just so, among the Ohio State fan base, are just so impossibly high that unless it's a big, a beat down in Michigan and a national championship every year, it's a failure. And that's just not realistic. And, maybe in a world where Alabama doesn't have the dynasty that they've had, maybe people look at things a bit more realistically with that. And look, I think it's a good thing that Ohio State fans have such high standards, in the sense that, it demands a lot from the team, these players, these coaches, all of that is a good thing. Ohio State should be held to a high standard, but there does have to be some realistic kind of perspective to it too, right? You have to understand that not every season is going to be defeated. Look, they haven't gone undefeated in many of their seasons, even national championship seasons. So, there's still an opportunity here. And I keep telling people that have their doubts about this game coming up, look, 3 weeks ago, Ohio State was the team everyone was talking about that could beat Georgia. Maybe a little bit more than that now. But before really that Michigan game, maybe before the Maryland game, everyone was talking about Ohio State, the number 1 and number 2 team in the country. Ohio State has the offense that maybe can expose Georgia a little bit. The defense was obviously playing much better. And really, now there's some cracks in things. You saw Maryland move the ball. You saw this, that, and the other thing. Obviously, there was the game at Northwestern, but really it was one half, maybe even really one quarter. Let's remember, Ohio State was down by 4 going into the fourth quarter against Michigan, and it was a one-score game later in that quarter still. It's one quarter that kind of blows the doors off things for Ohio State. Now this perception of the Buckeyes, despite a full season of sample size, really changes in the minds of a lot of people. So, I think there's still reasons to like this team, reasons to be hopeful this team can still win a national championship this year if you're a Buckeye fan. Now, to get to your question, Mark, I think this, and Ryan Day's put it, and players have echoed it, this new lease on life that they've gotten with the playoff. I honestly think that they are viewing it that way. Look, the players that we talked to admit after the Michigan game, they were down. They were, feeling sorry for themselves for the next day or so. They got back out to practice, I want to say Monday or Tuesday, and the vibe wasn't there as they were coming out to practice. It wasn't the same level of energy. And defensive end JT Tuimoloau, the sophomore, kind of gathered the team together in a huddle and gave kind of a passioned speech to the team about, let's not waste a day. There's still an opportunity here for us to get in. Really a good opportunity. Really only needed one loss by one team, and obviously they ended up winning that Pac-12 championship game. But that kind of fueled this team. A lot of guys brought that up when we spoke with them about JT Tuimoloau's speech, you would say, and that got them going that week where they didn't know where their future was going to lie. If they were going to the playoff, they're going to the Rose Bowl, the Orange Bowl, whatever it may be. And from there on out, apparently, from everything we've heard, the practices were as if they had an opponent at the end of that week, even though they didn't. And then obviously they saw what happened that Friday night Pac-12 championship game. Utah upsets USC. I think most of the guys were pretty confident in what was going to happen for Ohio State. But you still had to wait till Sunday, and a lot of admitted their nerves. They got together to watch the playoff selection show at the Woody Hayes Athletic Center, and the way they did it, they had to wait to fourth team be announced as number 4, and they were pretty excited, and I think that took it to another level. And so now the focus is playing with energy, kind of getting back to what was working earlier in the year, and finding the right offense to get what went wrong with the defense, fixing those issues, same that every team's doing as they head into the playoff. But Ohio State, as I said before, I really think they're viewing this as that new lease on life that Ryan Day's preaching, and we'll find out how well it works when they play Georgia on New Year's Eve. But the energy, the excitement for this game is certainly there, and I think they realize they almost lost it. It was almost taken away. Now they have another opportunity.
It's a good lesson on life for young men that are supposed to be growing and maturing, that you can work hard, put a lot of effort into something, and either be successful to a certain extent, or maybe somebody outworks you, or somebody's just better than you are, but that doesn't mean that they need to be better the next time. So you need to regroup. And sometimes you actually, as they had to experience there for a week plus, work when you don't know what the outcome is going to be or what the payoff is going to be, but still put the work in to better yourself. So that is intriguing, because I think if both of these teams are laser focused and at their maximum, we could have a classic on our hands. And few people doubt where Georgia's mind is. It's just because of the Ohio State setback, of course, against Michigan, where their heads are at. So, Pat, I'll ask you this question.
Real quick.
I don't think there's any question. But what's that, Pat?
Just real quick. You mentioned the talent of this game. This is the game everyone's wanted to see since probably the end of last season, right? It made, the top 3 teams were expected to be Ohio State, Alabama, and Georgia. You knew one of Alabama or Georgia was going to come out of the SEC. Ohio State was thought to be that other team. So you're getting, maybe this isn't the round of the playoff that you wanted this matchup if you're a college football fan, but certainly set up the way, most people thought these two teams meeting in the college football playoff, 4 and 5 star against 4 and 5 star. Yes, Ohio State has a loss that people didn't see coming, but I think this is still set up to be a colossal matchup between two of, as you said, two of the most talented teams in college football.
Absolutely, Pat. And so to look at both sides of the ball for Ohio State, I think that they've got to be, razor sharp at every level, both sides of the ball, special teams, buttoned up across the board. Don't have to be perfect, but near perfect. But if you were going to start a priority list of units that needed to perform in this game, where would you start that list?
I think for the offensive side of the ball, I would start with the offensive line. Look, defensive line for Georgia is as good as Ohio State will have faced all year. Jalen Carter leads that, the defensive tackle. You've got to, protect C.J. Stroud, which the Buckeyes have done a pretty good job this year of doing. And then they've got to open holes for these running backs. You can't become one-dimensional in this game. I kind of look back to the end of the game against Penn State when things were working for Ohio State. They were able to break off a big run with TreVeyon Henderson. C.J. Stroud was able to move the ball through various receivers. And that all starts with the offensive line. I think that's going to be key for Ohio State, for a line that's been good, pretty good, but not always great. That it needs to be better, especially in the game. Defensively, it's got to be the secondary, specifically the corners. Georgia doesn't have this elite level of wide receivers that really comes from the tight ends, a lot of what they do. But still, you cannot give up those big plays that you did against Michigan, and you can't give up, you can't have missed tackles and missed assignments and things like that at this level. Jim Knowles has a saying that, 5 or fewer explosive plays per game, you go undefeated. And I asked a couple guys yesterday about that, does that change when you're playing these MAC level teams, the Michigans, the Georgias, the teams that have like for like talent? And they wouldn't go that far, but when maybe the offense wasn't clicking as well against Michigan, you can't afford 5 plays that go for touchdowns like they did, 5 big plays that go for touchdowns. And there were some other ones too, some 15, 20 yards that, were kind of drive extenders and things like that just can't happen if you're going to be successful against a team like Georgia. So a lot of that will come in the secondary and specifically with the corners.
And you get to feel as though this defensive line needs to step up, certainly, and control the line of scrimmage to a certain extent. Of course, I'm stating the obvious, but because then you put yourself in the dilemma of loading the box to stop the run and exposing the secondary, and guys like Brock Bowers get downfield and create mismatches that they already have, or that you've got to cover the Brock Bowers of the world and bracket him, and then you relieve pressure off the running game and be susceptible there. So it's a basic dilemma of which way you go.
Yeah. I mean, look, at this level, whatever team you face is going to have weapons that are going to be a headache for a defensive coordinator. Ohio State's defensive line hasn't been as good as I think many people expected statistically this year. It's just not, JT Tuimoloau had the huge game against Penn State, and he's been good. Zach Harrison's had moments. Jack Sawyer's had moments. And the guys in the middle have played well, but there needs to be production in this game. They need to get to Stetson Bennett. They need to bring the running down, behind the line of scrimmage or near it. That's going to be key too. It's huge. But yeah, when looking for, we could go through all the positions and describe why they're going to be important, right? But yeah, you're definitely right about the defensive line, and they need to be at best in this game for sure.
Pat Murphy, Bucknuts 247 Sports. Get there. Get prepped for Ohio State and Georgia on New Year's Eve. Pat, we always appreciate you stopping by. Would love to have you back before they kick off.
Yeah, absolutely.